Welcome back to the Tabernacle Sunday School Podcast. This ministry is sponsored by Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church and Pastor Reverend Lynn L.F. McDaniel.
And we are so glad you're here joining us for this deep dive today.
Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church is located at 714 South Shelby Street in Louisville, Kentucky, Smoketown Holy Ghost Headquarters number 1. Sunday school begins at 10 a.m.
Yes, it does, right in the heart of the city.
And, this week also brings us close to International Day of Friendship. And that is such a fitting connection to Jeremiah 29. Because God tells his people, while they are in Babylon, to seek the peace of the city and pray for it. Now, that is not easy friendship.
No, it is not.
That is not convenient friendship. That is holy assignment.
No, it is one thing to be friendly when everybody is treating you right. I mean, anybody can do that, But can you seek peace in Babylon? Can you pray for the city that makes you uncomfortable? Can you bless a place you did not choose?
That preach right there. Because some of us want God to move us out of Babylon, and God is saying, before I move you, I need you to learn how to represent me right there.
Glory be to God, because we always want the quick exit, right? We want the easy way out.
Hallelujah. Won't he do it? Talk back to me if you can, because that right there, that'll preach. That's Daddy God. I'm about to praise his name on this podcast.
I mean, it is just so powerful when you really think about it. The sources we're looking at today, especially that piece on seeking the peace of Babylon, faith and global friendship, they make this point so incredibly clear.
They really do. And the key phrase that just jumped out at me from the reading is this. You may have to live in Babylon, but Babylon does not have to live in you.
That is the whole thing right there.
That is where Jeremiah 29 meets us. God's people are in exile. They are not where they want to be. They want quick escape. But God sends Jeremiah with a letter that says, build, plant, pray, seek peace, reject false voices, and seek me with your whole heart.
And, what's so fascinating is how deeply counterintuitive that is. Because, usually when you find yourself completely hopelessly trapped in a terrible situation, I mean, the natural human expectation is to fight or flee.
Exactly. I mean, if you're in a deeply toxic work environment or just a geographical place you never wanted to be, it's instinctual.
Right. Yeah. It's totally instinctual. It's practically wired into our central nervous system. It's that classic fight or flight response.
Right. You either look for the absolute nearest emergency exit to escape, or, you swing to the other extreme and figure out how to burn the whole place to the ground.
Which makes perfect sense psychologically. I mean, we crave autonomy. We want to take our power back.
And this is what we're really digging into today with these historical sources. Those instinctual responses often lead to catastrophic failure for conquered groups.
Yeah, they really do.
So today, our mission for this deep dive is to unpack this 2,500-year-old letter that fundamentally rewired how a displaced people handled crisis. We're looking at ancient history, we're looking at theological commentary on Jeremiah, a case study on Basil the Great.
Oh, the Basil stuff is incredible.
It really is. And we're even tying it into a modern song by the Worship Collective. But I want to make sure we're very clear up front. We're looking at these religious and historical texts impartially, really just trying to convey the immense historical and psychological impact of these ideas without taking sides on modern political issues.
Right, because the historical dynamics here, they speak for themselves. The sheer breadth of this source material is wild. We're taking an ancient geopolitical disaster and tracing its psychological aftershocks all the way to today.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Take us back to 597 BC. Paint the picture of this catastrophe, because this wasn't just a bad day, right? This is the end of a civilization.
Yeah, completely. So you have to look at the map of the ancient Near East around 597 BC. We are in Jerusalem, the capital of Judah. And the undeniable, absolute superpower of the day is the Neo-Babylonian Empire.
Led by King Nebuchadnezzar.
Right, King Nebuchadnezzar II. And he's not just some standard king. He is the architect of this massive, ruthless military machine that is basically swallowing the known world whole.
And he's just laid siege to Jerusalem.
Exactly. The city walls are breached. The temple is looted. This is historically called the second wave of the Babylonian exile. But we really need to look at Nebuchadnezzar's imperial strategy here.
Yeah, our sources make a very deliberate point about this. It wasn't just a chaotic mob grabbing people at random.
No, it was highly calculated. The Babylonians didn't just want to burn the city. They wanted its resources. And the most valuable resource is always human capital.
Right.
So the texts tell us he took King Jeconiah, he took the queen mother, he took the royal court, the eunuchs, the princes. Basically, he rounds up the entire political and aristocratic elite.
To decapitate the leadership. So they can't organize a rebellion.
Exactly. He leaves behind the severely weakened city with a puppet king named Zedekiah to just manage the rubble. But then Nebuchadnezzar does something really specific and brilliant, honestly. He takes all the craftsmen and the smiths.
Wait, I have to pause you there, because that detail is so fascinating to me. If I'm a conquering king, obviously I take the rival king. I take the wealthy to seize their assets. But rounding up the local carpenters and metalworkers, that feels, I don't know, almost petty.
It does seem that way at first glance. Like, why march blue-collar workers across a brutal desert? But think about the mechanics of ancient warfare. What does a smith actually do?
Well, they work with iron and bronze.
Right. They forge the swords, they shape the spearheads, they reinforce the heavy iron gates of a city.
Oh, wow. I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, if you want to ensure that a conquered nation can never, ever mount a successful violent rebellion, you don't just take their generals. You take the people who manufacture the weapons.
You completely dismantle their military-industrial complex.
Exactly. It's forced demilitarization through a strategic brain drain. If you take the guys who know how to smelt iron, the people left behind in Jerusalem are basically reduced to fighting with sticks and rocks.
That is terrifyingly efficient.
It really is, and it has a dual purpose. Not only do you cripple Jerusalem, but you simultaneously import thousands of the best engineers and builders to strengthen your own empire. Nebuchadnezzar used these exact captive craftsmen to build the legendary architecture of Babylon.
Like the Ishtar Gate and the Ziggurat.
Precisely. You use your enemy's best talent to build your own monuments.
So we have this population of elites and skilled artisans who have just been subjected to horrific trauma. They've watched their city fall, they've been stripped of everything, and they are forcibly marched hundreds of miles across unforgiving terrain.
And keep in mind, a march like that, it was brutal. Disease, starvation, exposure.
And they arrive in a city that represents everything they hate. They are now exiles. And into this absolute nightmare steps our protagonist, named Jeremiah. Let's look at his profile because he is a fascinating figure.
He is one of the most complex figures in ancient literature. Historically, he's known as the Weeping Prophet.
And he comes by that title, honestly, right? The texts tell us he was drafted into this prophetic role when he was quite young, and his entire career was defined by being profoundly, dangerously unpopular.
Oh, yeah. For years before the siege of 597 BC, Jeremiah was basically standing in the streets screaming that the empire was coming.
He's the guy who saw the Babylonian war machine coming from miles away.
He saw it coming, and he told them that their corrupt political alliances and their moral decay were going to result in their total destruction.
And naturally, everyone hated him for it. He's the ultimate bearer of bad news in a culture that was demanding toxic positivity.
That's a great way to put it. He's like a modern corporate whistleblower who keeps showing the board of directors the data that the company is going bankrupt, and they just want to hear that profits are up.
They threw him in a cistern. They imprisoned him. But he clearly loves his people. That's why he's weeping in agony for them. But he utterly refuses to lie to them to make them feel comfortable.
Which brings us to the pivotal moment in our historical record. The exiles are in Babylon. Jeremiah is still back in the ruined city of Jerusalem, and he decides to send a letter to the captives.
And the sources actually give us the specific delivery mechanism, which I love. It adds so much realism. He doesn't just shout this into the wind.
Right. He writes a physical scroll.
And sends it via two royal messengers, Elisha and Jeremiah. These guys were likely diplomatic envoys traveling from the puppet king Zedekiah to Nebuchadnezzar's court. Jeremiah essentially slips his letter into the diplomatic pouch.
It's an incredible image. Two men carrying a scroll across a treacherous desert trade route, taking weeks just to deliver a message to a traumatized refugee camp.
But let me push back on this scenario for a second.
Right.
Because if I try to put myself in the psychological state of an exile in that exact moment, the entire concept of this letter feels almost absurd. Well, you were talking about people who have just been forcibly marched across the known world, have been enslaved in a foreign superpower's capital. Why on earth would you send a letter to people in that state? Are they even capable of processing a message?
That is the essential question. The psychology of the exile in that moment was likely just a cocktail of profound shock, desperate homesickness, and paralyzing cognitive dissonance.
Right, their whole worldview just collapsed.
Completely. Because their worldview was tied to the physical geography of Jerusalem. They believed their God lived in the temple there. So to be ripped from that land wasn't just a change of address, it was an existential crisis.
They are sitting by the rivers of Babylon, weeping, thinking the universe is over.
But the very fact that Jeremiah sends this letter and that it arrives proves something vital. It establishes the premise that a message, a truth, can reach people even in their most displaced, painful, unfamiliar places.
They're completely off the map of their known world, but they aren't unreachable.
Exactly. But there is a brutal irony here. A letter reaching you in exile might feel like a lifeline. But the actual contents of the message Jeremiah sent were the absolute last things they wanted to hear.
Oh man, yeah. It wasn't a letter of comfort at all.
Not at all. It systematically dismantled every single coping mechanism they were trying to use.
Which brings us to the actual text of the letter preserved in the 29th chapter of Jeremiah. I really want to walk through the major thematic shocks that this letter delivered, because it's a masterclass in challenging human assumptions.
Let's do it. What's the first shock?
The very first psychological hurdle he throws at them is the issue of agency and control. The letter opens with Jeremiah stating, "Unto all that are carried away captives, whom I have caused to be carried away from Jerusalem unto Babylon."
Oh, wow. Yeah. That immediately forces them to confront the most difficult philosophical question of their suffering. Who is actually in charge of this disaster?
Right. Because if you are an exile standing in the shadow of the Babylonian ziggurats, the answer is super obvious. Nebuchadnezzar is in charge. He has the chariots. He broke down the walls. He is the author of the trauma.
But the text explicitly claims that God takes full responsibility. Quote, whom I have caused to be carried away.
It downgrades Nebuchadnezzar from an omnipotent emperor to just a mere human instrument.
And our sources note this wasn't a new concept pulled out of thin air. This specific consequence had been outlined centuries earlier in their founding documents, specifically in the book of Deuteronomy.
The covenant curses, right?
Exactly. The covenant stated that if they continuously exploited the poor, engaged in rampant corruption, and abandoned their core values, the land would essentially vomit them out.
So Jeremiah is reminding them that Babylon didn't dethrone their God. Their God mobilized Babylon.
That is a staggering theological concept to swallow when you are the one suffering. It means that even in this horrific, painful place, there is a sovereign architecture at work.
The pain isn't random. But as shocking as that framing was, the second major paradigm shift in the letter deals with economics and social integration. And this must have sounded like absolute madness to the people reading it.
This is where we get to the core of the radical survival strategy. The exiles are essentially in a holding pattern. They're likely living in temporary tents, keeping their bags packed.
Just waiting for the geopolitical winds to shift so they can go home.
Right. But Jeremiah's letter tells them to do the exact opposite. He writes, "Build ye houses and dwell in them, and plant gardens and eat the fruit of them. Take ye wives and beget sons and daughters, that ye may be increased there and not diminished."
Put yourself in their shoes for a second. You are looking at the massive, intimidating walls of Babylon. You despise this city. Every single brick represents your subjugation.
And the instruction from your homeland isn't form an underground resistance. It isn't maintain strict isolation.
No. The instruction is, go to the local Babylonian real estate office. Buy a plot of land in enemy territory. Pour a deep foundation. Go to the nursery, buy some seeds, and start an orchard.
And think about how long it takes an orchard to grow. You don't plant a fig tree if you're leaving next week. You are planting for years down the road.
Start having kids. And get ready to marry those kids off to have grandkids right here in Babylon. It is a direct command to invest heavily, financially and emotionally, in a place you actively despise.
But it goes even further than just buying property. The third thematic shock of the letter, and the one that really anchors the sociological brilliance of this whole deep dive, is the instruction regarding their relationship with the empire itself.
Jeremiah writes, "And seek the peace of the city whither I have caused you to be carried away captives, and pray unto the Lord for it. For in the peace thereof shall ye have peace."
I really want to spend some time on this, because the sheer radical nature of that command cannot be overstated. What's fascinating here is if you think about the standard historical playbook for a conquered people.
Right, when you are subsumed by a hostile empire, you really only have two choices, historically speaking.
Exactly. Option A, you assimilate completely. You drop your culture, you adopt their gods, you blend in, and you disappear into the melting pot.
You become Babylonian.
Right. Or option B, you isolate. You form a rigid, insular commune, you build a cultural wall, and you actively seek the downfall of your captors through sabotage or violent rebellion.
You poison the local water supply. You burn the grain silos. You act as a fifth column from the inside.
But Jeremiah introduces option C, which is virtually unheard of in antiquity. He says, do not assimilate and lose your identity, but also do not isolate and sabotage.
He commands them to integrate socially and economically and to actively seek the welfare, the prosperity, and the peace of the polytheistic, brutal empire that just burned their homes to the ground.
It is the ultimate counterintuitive strategy.
I was trying to come up with a modern analogy that captures the emotional difficulty of this, and the closest I could get is a deeply hostile corporate takeover.
Oh, that's a good one. Walk me through it.
Okay, imagine you work for a company you absolutely love. You help build it from the ground up. You believe in its mission. Your best friends work there. And suddenly, a massive, ruthless, soulless corporation buys you out.
A total hostile takeover.
Right. They fire your beloved CEO, they strip your benefits, they dismantle your department, and they force you to relocate to their sterile, hyper-competitive, awful headquarters in a city you hate.
It's a scenario that, unfortunately, a lot of people can relate to on a visceral level.
And your immediate human instinct is sabotage, right? You think, I am going to do the absolute bare minimum to collect my paycheck. I'm going to quietly undermine my new terrible boss. I'm going to leak their internal documents to the press, and I'm going to sit back and smile when this awful corporation finally goes bankrupt.
That's the natural instinct.
But instead, you get an email from a trusted, wise mentor who says, no, I want you to walk into that hostile office every single day and do your absolute best work. I want you to innovate. I want you to mentor their junior employees. I want you to make that terrible corporation as wildly profitable, efficient, and harmonious as possible.
Because if they succeed, you will have a stable paycheck to feed your family.
Exactly. That requires an almost superhuman level of emotional maturity. You are being asked to divorce your own ego and your desire for vengeance from your daily actions.
And our sources actually connect this ancient instruction to a very modern sociological concept. One of the texts in our stack discusses the theme of seeking the peace of Babylon, faith and global friendship. And it ties this directly to the International Day of Friendship, which occurs on July 30th.
I find that connection so fascinating because when we casually talk about friendship, we usually mean easy friendship.
Right, affiliating with people who look like us, vote like us, agree with us, and validate our existing worldviews. It's comfortable.
But the source text argues that true radical friendship, the kind of global societal peacemaking that actually changes the trajectory of human history, requires crossing massive, seemingly impossible cultural divides.
The exiles were strict monotheists trapped in the capital of ancient polytheism. Babylon's entire value system was completely contrary to theirs, yet they were commanded to bless it.
The source points out that this ancient mandate is the direct precursor to a very famous command Jesus gave centuries later in the Sermon on the Mount, to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you.
It is demanding that you show active kindness and seek the tangible material good of people who vehemently disagree with you, and even people who have actively harmed you.
And there is that key thematic phrase that jumped out to me in the sources again. It perfectly encapsulates how you actually survive this without losing your mind or your identity. The text says, you may have to live in Babylon, but Babylon does not have to live in you.
Let's analyze that phrase again, because it really is profound. It is the formula for maintaining internal sovereignty.
Internal sovereignty, I like that.
It means you can engage with the culture, you can be a blessing to your neighbors, you can contribute heavily to the economy without internalizing the negative, toxic, or idolatrous values of the empire. You can serve the city without worshiping the city's gods.
It is a brilliant, highly sophisticated way to navigate displacement. But, as you can probably guess, in 597 BC, when the exiles unrolled that scroll and read those words, they absolutely hated it.
Of course they did, because trauma doesn't want nuance. Trauma wants a quick fix. When you are hurting, you do not want to hear about a multi-generational gardening project in enemy territory. You want someone to tell you the pain is going to stop tomorrow.
And naturally, as happens in literally every crisis in human history, there were opportunists standing by, more than happy to sell the exiles exactly what they wanted to hear.
Which brings us to the primary antagonists of our story, the false prophets.
Right. Because in any vacuum of certainty, voices will inevitably rise up to tell panicked people exactly what their anxiety desires.
The historical sources name a couple of these figures specifically. There was a man named Hananiah, who actually appears in the previous chapter of Jeremiah, having a public showdown with him. There was another prominent figure named Shemaiah.
And there were also groups the text broadly refers to as diviners, right?
Yeah, these were essentially people practicing pagan fortune-telling rituals that were strictly forbidden by Jewish law, but In a state of panic, the exiles were willing to listen to anyone who offered good news.
And the message these false prophets were peddling was the exact polar opposite of Jeremiah's letter. Their message was, do not listen to Jeremiah. Do not unpack your bags. Do not buy a house. This whole exile thing is just a brief geopolitical misunderstanding.
God is going to supernaturally crush Nebuchadnezzar's army, and we will all be on the road back to Jerusalem in a few weeks, maybe a couple of years at the absolute most.
It is the ancient equivalent of soothing lies. It is the seductive promise of a frictionless escape from consequences. But Jeremiah's counter-message in the letter is incredibly blunt. He writes, let not your prophets and your diviners that be in the midst of you deceive you, for they prophesy falsely unto you in my name. I have not sent them.
I love how explicit that is. He's warning them that just because someone uses familiar spiritual language, just because someone confidently says, God told me, does not make it true.
The most dangerous lies aren't the ones that come from the Babylonians. The most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in the vocabulary of your own faith, delivered by your own people.
And then, after dismantling the false prophets, Jeremiah drops the hammer. He delivers the actual, unvarnished timeline of the exile. He writes, for thus saith the Lord, that after 70 years be accomplished at Babylon, I will visit you, and perform my good word toward you in causing you to return to this place.
70 years. I want us to sit with that number for a second, because that timeline drop must have just sucked all the oxygen out of the room.
It is a devastating metric, and we really need to unpack the profound, multi-layered significance of that specific number, 70. It wasn't just a randomly generated large number to scare them.
Right.
First, in ancient Near Eastern literature, and specifically in biblical texts like Psalm 90, 70 to 80 years is defined as the standard full span of a human life.
So to tell an audience of adults that you will be here for 70 years is a polite theological way of saying you are all going to die in Babylon.
Yes. You will never see the hills of Jerusalem again. Only your children, or perhaps your grandchildren who haven't even been born yet, will see the homeland.
It is essentially a death sentence for the current generation. But the number goes even deeper into their legal and ecological history, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The 70 years is directly tied to a concept called the Sabbath years.
Oh, this is a brilliant piece of historical symmetry. Let's make sure we explain this clearly. What is a Sabbath year?
All right, so according to the covenant laws in Leviticus 26, the Israelites were commanded to operate on a 7-year agricultural cycle. They could plant, harvest, and work their fields for 6 years. But the 7th year was to be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land itself.
No planting, no pruning, no harvesting. You let the soil recover, and whatever grew naturally was for the poor and the wild animals.
But, driven by greed and economic anxiety, the nation had systematically ignored this law for centuries. They relentlessly overworked the soil year after year, refusing to trust the system. They were committing ecological and spiritual abuse against the land.
Exactly. So the writer of 2 Chronicles explicitly states the math behind the exile. He says that the exile was designed to last exactly as long as the Sabbath years that had been stolen.
Wow.
God was essentially saying, you refuse to give the land its rest while you lived on it. Fine, I will remove you and the land will finally enjoy its Sabbaths while you sit in Babylon. The 70 years represented centuries of accumulated unpaid ecological debt.
The math of the discipline perfectly matches the history of their disobedience. It isn't an arbitrary, angry punishment. It is a meticulous, structural correction. But to really help our listeners grasp the sheer weight of a 70-year sentence, let's look at a thought exercise provided by one of our source texts.
I love this part.
I want you, the listener, to think about the world exactly 70 years ago from today.
It's a brilliant way to contextualize time.
Let's anchor this in the mid-1950s. 70 years ago, Dwight D. Eisenhower was just being overwhelmingly reelected to his second term as President of the United States. The Supreme Court was just handing down rulings making segregation on public buses illegal in the wake of the Montgomery bus boycott.
In sports, Mickey Mantle had just won the MVP award.
And in the world of technology, a company called IBM had just proudly invented the very first commercial hard disk drive. This piece of cutting-edge technology was the size of 2 large refrigerators, weighed over a ton, and held exactly 5 megabytes of data.
When you lay it out chronologically like that, it is staggering. Think of the cultural shifts, the technological revolutions, the political lifetimes that have risen and fallen since the Eisenhower administration, and a 5-megabyte refrigerator.
Right. Now imagine someone knocking on your door today, dragging you away from your home, your career, and your family. and telling you that you are only allowed to return after the equivalent amount of time from Eisenhower to the present day has passed.
That isn't a temporary setback. That is an eternity, an entire lifetime of waiting.
Which brings us back to a fundamental question of human psychology. If 70 years is that devastating, why do we constantly gravitate toward the false prophets? Why do we eagerly consume the content of the Shemaiahs of the world who tell us it'll be over in a month, while ignoring the Jeremiahs who give us the hard structural truth?
Because false hope acts as an anesthetic. It numbs the immediate, searing pain of reality. But the danger is that the anesthetic paralyzes you.
Let's think about the practical implications here. If you believe the false prophet who promises you are leaving Babylon tomorrow, what do?
You do nothing. You sit on your packed suitcase. You never go to the market to buy seeds for a garden. You never lay the foundation for a house. You certainly don't invest in the local community or send your kids to the local schools.
You live your entire life in a state of suspended animation, perpetually waiting in the lobby of history for a train that is never going to arrive.
You pause your actual life while waiting for perfect conditions to resume it.
And that is why false hope is so incredibly destructive. It robs you of your present reality. Jeremiah's harsh truth, the 70-year timeline, was actually the only thing that could set them free to live meaningful, productive lives in the present.
Once you accept the grim reality that you are going to be in the hard place for a long time, the anxiety of waiting dissipates.
Yeah.
You finally unpack your bags, you look around, and you get to work.
Okay, that is a profound insight. The truth hurts, but the lie paralyzes. But Jeremiah doesn't just drop this 70-year death sentence and walk away. He doesn't leave them in total despair.
No, he doesn't.
He follows this harsh, structural reality check with what is arguably the single most famous, most frequently quoted, and perhaps most fundamentally misunderstood sentence in this entire ancient text.
We are arriving at the cultural juggernaut that is Jeremiah 29.11.
I am so glad we get to deconstruct this verse today, because if you have ever set foot in a bookstore or browsed the greeting card aisle at a pharmacy or bought a coffee mug with an inspirational quote on it, you have seen this verse.
Oh, absolutely.
It reads, "For I know the thoughts that I think towards you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end." Or, as many modern translations render it, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future.
It is an undeniably beautiful, poetic piece of literature, but sociologically and theologically it has been entirely stripped of its context in the modern era.
Completely amputated from the surrounding text, it is used today almost exclusively to support what is often called the prosperity gospel. It's pitched as a personalized cosmic guarantee that if you just believe hard enough, the universe, or God, is going to immediately give you the promotion you want, cure your illness, fix your broken marriage, and make your physical day-to-day life smooth, wealthy, and prosperous right now.
But if we employ basic reading comprehension and connect this to the bigger picture we just established in verse 10, that modern interpretation completely collapses.
Let me push back on the modern interpretation for a second, because the logic just makes no sense. Jeremiah literally just told them in the preceding breath, you are going to be stuck in a hostile empire for 70 years, and almost all of you reading this letter will die in exile. How can you follow that with, I have plans to prosper you right now?
You can't. That's the genius of the text. You cannot read verse 11 without the shadow of verse 10. The promise of peace and an expected end is explicitly not a promise of a quick escape, and it is certainly not a promise of instant, individualized physical comfort.
It is a macro, multi-generational promise to a people group.
Precisely. It's saying, the story of your people does not end in the graveyard of Babylon. The expected end is not about making the current generation wealthy. It's about a deep, long-term spiritual and cultural restoration.
The ultimate good being promised isn't a frictionless life. The ultimate good is that the painful discipline of the exile will actually achieve its intended purpose.
Which leads us to one of the most fascinating historical extrapolations in our source materials. We know they went to Babylon, we know they stayed for decades, but did it work?
Did this grand 70-year sociological experiment actually achieve the expected end Jeremiah talked about?
The historical and archaeological data on this is absolutely captivating. To understand if it worked, we have to look at the disease they were suffering from before the exile.
Right.
If you read the historical books of Israel and Judah leading up to 597 BC, the nation was constantly chronically struggling with polytheism. They were hopelessly addicted to the religious practices of the surrounding cultures.
They were always setting up fertility idols in the groves, adopting Canaanite gods, and blending the worship of Yahweh with the worship of Baal. It was an unbreakable cycle of cultural assimilation.
They were spiritually malleable. They just absorbed whatever the dominant culture around them was doing.
So what is the cure for that? According to the narrative of the text, God sends them to Babylon. And you have to understand what Babylon was in the ancient world. It was the absolute epicenter, the undisputed capital city of ancient polytheism.
It was a sensory overload of pagan worship. They had massive ziggurats reaching into the sky, elaborate temples dedicated to Marduk, the Ishtar Gate covered in dragons and bulls, and thousands of priests conducting daily rituals. It was a society completely saturated in idolatry.
So it's essentially the ultimate immersion therapy. You have people struggling with the temptation of idols, so you drop them into the Las Vegas of idolatry.
That's a great analogy.
But hold on, how does that cure them? Wouldn't living in the capital of polytheism just make them more polytheistic? If I have a gambling problem, locking me in a casino for 70 years seems like a terrible idea.
That is the logical assumption. But the psychology of saturation is strange. Being submerged in the absolute zenith of polytheism, seeing the sheer brutality and emptiness of the Babylonian imperial machine up close for 70 years, completely shattered their romanticized view of foreign gods.
They saw what a society built on those idols actually looked like, and it repulsed them.
Exactly. They realized that their only distinct identity, their only hope of survival as a people, was their covenant with Yahweh.
So the sheer exposure cured the addiction.
Yes. And the historical proof of this is undeniable. When the decree of Cyrus finally allowed the exiles to return to Jerusalem decades later, the nation that came back was radically different. The chronic, centuries-old struggle with polytheism was gone. The exile had forged them into a fiercely, stoutly monotheistic culture.
Our sources point to the intertestamental period to prove this, and I want to explain that clearly. This is the era between the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament. You have the famous history of the Maccabees in the 2nd century BC.
Right, when the Seleucid Greek Empire, led by Antiochus Epiphanes, conquered Jerusalem.
And Antiochus tried to force the Jews to assimilate by literally sacrificing a pig on the altar of the Jewish temple and demanding they worship Greek gods.
Before the Babylonian exile, the Israelites likely would have just caved and added Zeus to their pantheon to avoid trouble.
But after the exile, the Maccabees started a brutal, uncompromising guerrilla war against the greatest military power of their day. Rather than bow to a Greek statue, they refused to cave.
And you see that exact same resilience centuries later under Roman occupation in the 1st century AD. The Romans were masters of assimilation. They would conquer a people and just absorb their local gods into the Roman pantheon.
But the Jewish people fiercely resisted the polytheistic pressure of Rome. They refused to worship the emperor, they rioted over Roman eagles being placed in the temple, and they maintained that strict monotheism all the way to the catastrophic destruction of the Second Temple in AD 70.
So the 70 years in Babylon functioned exactly like a blacksmith's forge. It took a wavering, spiritually soft, easily influenced people, subjected them to the intense, crushing heat of exile, and hammered them into a resilient, unshakable culture.
The discipline worked perfectly. The expected end wasn't a comfortable retirement in the suburbs of Babylon. It was a reformed, ironclad identity.
It is a masterful stroke of historical irony. The very event that looked like it would permanently destroy their faith is the exact mechanism that cemented it into history forever.
So if the ultimate long-term goal of the exile was a restored, unbreakable relationship with the divine, how did Jeremiah's letter instruct these traumatized captives to actually achieve that day-to-day while they were still stuck in Babylon? What was the spiritual strategy for surviving the waiting room?
That brings us to the final segment of the letter, verses 12 through 14. After establishing the harsh 70-year timeline, Jeremiah outlines how they are to conduct themselves internally. He writes, "Then shall ye call upon me, and ye shall go and pray unto me, and I will hearken unto you, and ye shall seek me and find me, when ye shall search for me with all your heart."
When you search for me with all your heart, the phrasing there implies that up until this point, their seeking had been superficial.
Yeah, exactly. When they were back in Jerusalem, they wanted the geopolitical benefits of God. They wanted the protection, but they didn't want the actual relationship.
But exile strips all of that away. You don't have the beautiful temple anymore. You don't have the holy city, the priesthood, or the rituals. All you have is the raw, unadorned act of calling out in the dark.
And the theological promise in verse 13 is stunning in its simplicity. If you seek with your whole heart, you will find. The text is making a profound claim about the nature of the divine. God isn't trying to remain lost.
To help visualize this, one of our source commentaries provides a brilliant, evocative analogy about the dynamics of seeking and finding, specifically comparing it to the game of hide and seek.
Oh, I loved this analogy in the reading. Walk us through it.
Okay, so the author of the commentary talks about a time when he was a young kid playing hide and seek with his cousins at his grandparents' sprawling house. He wanted to win desperately. So he had this, brilliant idea to climb up inside the actual fireplace, shimmy up the chimney flue 4 or 5 feet, and stand perfectly still on a small, soot-covered ledge in the pitch black.
That is the ultimate terrifying kid move,
Sure.
completely dedicated to evasion.
It worked. He says he was absolutely filthy, breathing in soot, but his cousins never found him. He won the game. But he notes why he won. Because when a child hides, the entire objective of the game is evasion. The goal is to remain completely undetected at all costs. You want to outsmart the seeker. The author then points out that when we think about seeking God, especially when we are suffering in our own personal Babylons, we often project that childish, evasive mindset onto the divine. We think God has shimmied up some cosmic chimney, pulled up the ladder, and is holding his breath, hoping we give up looking.
Which, if you think about it, is a profoundly depressing theology. It implies the universe is actively trying to hide from your pain.
Exactly. But the source suggests a completely different paradigm. Instead of picturing a child hiding in a chimney, we should picture an adult playing hide and seek with a 3-year-old toddler.
Oh, this is so good.
When a parent plays hide and seek with a toddler, they don't climb into the HVAC ductwork and disappear for 3 hours.
Yeah.
What do? They hide behind the sheer living room curtain, but they deliberately leave their feet sticking out. Or they sit in the middle of the couch and simply hold a throw pillow over their face.
Why do they do that? Because the objective of the game isn't evasion. The parent isn't trying to outsmart the toddler. The objective is the joy of discovery. The parent wants to be found.
The hiding is just a playful mechanism to initiate the pursuit and build the relationship.
It completely flips the script. In the trauma of the Babylonian exile, God wasn't hiding in a chimney. The divine was leaving feet sticking out from behind the curtains of their daily lives in Babylon, waiting to be found by a people who had finally realized they needed to look with their whole heart. The exile wasn't a cruel abandonment. It was a deliberate reset of the relational dynamic.
I think that is one of the most comforting theological frameworks I've ever heard.
Yeah.
It suggests that distance is an absence. And this specific framework, this idea of living faithfully in a state of exile, actively seeking the peace of a hostile city, and searching for the divine in the margins, didn't just stay trapped in 597 BC.
No, it became a foundational, load-bearing pillar for how later movements understood their entire place in the world.
The sources point out that centuries later, New Testament writers actively co-opted this exact sociological language. The Apostle Peter, for instance, wrote letters addressing early Christian believers not as citizens of the Roman Empire, but specifically referring to them as exiles, sojourners, or strangers scattered throughout the world.
The implication being that if you hold to a transcendent set of values, values of radical love, peace, and justice, you will always be a bit of an exile no matter what empire, country, or political system you happen to live under. Your true citizenship is elsewhere.
You are perpetually living in Babylon. And to illustrate how this philosophy played out historically, our sources provide an incredible, detailed case study from a few centuries after the New Testament, the life of a man known as Basil the Great.
Let's dive into Basil. We are moving forward to the 4th century, roughly AB 330 to 378. Set the stage for us.
Basil was an incredibly highly educated, brilliant man born into a wealthy family. He was living in a time of intense cultural, political, and theological turbulence. The Roman Empire was shifting, Christianity had recently been legalized, and was becoming intertwined with state power, which led to rampant corruption and brutal theological infighting.
And Basil's initial instinct, that exact binary fight-or-flight instinct we talked about in the very first minute of this episode, was flight. He looked at the corrupt, chaotic, political mess of the world around him, and he wanted out.
The ultimate Hananiah strategy. Just opt out. If you can't bring it down, run away.
Precisely. At the time, there was a massive movement called asceticism, where devout people would literally flee to the Egyptian deserts to live in caves or on top of pillars, trying to isolate themselves to achieve perfect, uncontaminated spiritual peace. And Basil initially wanted to do exactly that. He wanted to escape the toxicity of society.
But he didn't. He had a profound realization that directly echoed the sociological instructions of Jeremiah 29. He realized that the calling of a person of faith isn't to abandon the broken world to its own destruction so you can keep your own hands clean.
Right. The calling is to be a tangible blessing to the world. You are supposed to seek the peace of the city, not flee to the desert.
So he makes a radical pivot. He abandons the dream of the isolated cave, and he moves directly into the heart of the bustling, crowded, disease-ridden, complicated city of Caesarea in Cappadocia, and later gets deeply involved in the politics of the empire.
He unpacks his bags in Babylon, and then he gets to work. He starts building his houses and planting his gardens, metaphorically speaking.
The sources note that he established a monastic community, yes, but he didn't stop there. He looked at the suffering of the city and he built an orphanage. He built trade schools to teach the poor how to support themselves.
But his most remarkable achievement was in the realm of public health. In antiquity, if you got sick with a communicable disease like leprosy, you were cast out of the city to die in the wilderness. The empire had no safety net.
Basil looked at this and built a massive, sprawling philanthropic complex on the outskirts of the city. It had specialized wards for different diseases, housing for the poor, and dedicated staff to provide medical care.
Historians widely credit this complex, often called the Basiliad, as being the very first functional hospital in human history.
I really want that to sink in for a moment. Think about the cascading impact of that single choice. Because one man decided to swallow his desire for isolation because he chose to actively seek the peace of a complicated, corrupt city rather than hiding in a cave to maintain his own purity. The entire trajectory of global public health and human compassion was fundamentally altered.
The impact is, as the source text explicitly states, hard to overstate. He institutionalized compassion in a world that previously only valued power.
It is the ultimate historical manifestation of Jeremiah 29. He built, he planted, he integrated, and he sought the welfare of the city. And we, sitting here in the 21st century, are still benefiting from the paradigm shift he helped solidify.
But let's be honest, as much as we can intellectually applaud Basil the Great or the ancient Jews in Babylon, actually internalizing a truth like this in our own lives is incredibly difficult.
It is emotionally agonizing. Knowing that you have to stay in the hard place, accepting that the timeline for your deliverance might be 70 years, and forcing yourself to build and bless while you are actively bleeding, that goes against every survival instinct we have.
Intellectually, we understand the strategy. Emotionally, the friction is almost unbearable.
Which is exactly why we often need more than just historical case studies or dense theological arguments to survive. When you are in the waiting room of history, logic often fails you. We need something that bypasses the intellectual defenses and speaks directly to the emotional core.
We need art. Art is the universal mechanism for processing complex trauma.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most resonant piece of our source stack today. We have the lyrics to a modern song by a musical group called the Worship Collective. The song is aptly titled, Hope in Babylon.
It is fascinating to analyze how music can distill complex, ancient geopolitical theology into a 3-minute track that you can carry with you on your morning commute or listen to in a hospital waiting room.
Exactly. I want to read and analyze some of these lyrics because they perfectly trace the emotional arc of everything we've been unpacking today. The song doesn't start with toxic positivity. It opens with raw, unfiltered honesty.
What are the opening lines?
It says, I didn't choose this road I'm walking. I didn't plan this place of pain.
That is the authentic voice of the exile. That is the person who just got handed the bad medical diagnosis, or the person who just got laid off after 20 years, or the person trapped in a suffocating family dynamic.
It validates the initial trauma. It doesn't pretend that Babylon is a fun vacation destination. It acknowledges the lack of agency. I didn't choose this.
Right, but then it pivots from the complaint to the instruction, mirroring Jeremiah's letter.
The pre-chorus says, You told me build while I am waiting. You told me plant through all my tears. You said pray for the place I'm living and trust that you are still right here.
Plant through all my tears. That is such a powerful, evocative image. It fully acknowledges that the act of seeking the peace of the city, the act of investing your energy into a place you desperately want to leave, is agonizing work. You aren't whistling while you work. You are crying while you are digging in the dirt.
But the crucial part is, you are still digging. You're still planting. And then the chorus hits this powerful resolution of identity. It says, I've got hope in Babylon faith when the night is long. I will seek you with my whole heart and find you where I am.
It's that adult hide-and-seek analogy brought to life. I don't have to be back in the idealized Jerusalem of my past to find meaning or to find the divine. I can find it exactly where I am, even in this foreign, hostile, miserable place.
And what I find most crucial about the song is that it doesn't shy away from the harsh timeline drop we discussed earlier. In the second verse, it explicitly tackles the false prophets.
Let's hear it.
It says, false voices say it will be easy, but you call me to trust your word. 70 years may feel like forever, but every promise will be heard.
It is directly confronting the Hananiahs of our modern world. The toxic positivity influencers, the prosperity gospel preachers, the people on your social media feed telling you that if you just manifest hard enough, your problems will magically vanish by tomorrow morning.
The art is helping the listener accept the brutal 70-year reality without collapsing into nihilism or despair. It bridges the gap between the excruciating pain of the present moment and the promise of the expected end. And then the bridge of the song essentially serves as a rallying cry for anyone feeling stuck.
It says, build in the waiting, pray in the pain, seek him with all your heart. Plant in the valley, trust in his plan.
It completely transforms the waiting room. It takes a space of passive, agonizing torture and redefines it as a place of active, meaningful purpose.
So we've covered a massive amount of historical and psychological ground today. What does this all mean for you, the person listening to this deep dive right now?
If we synthesize everything we've explored today, from the brutal efficiency of Nebuchadnezzar's geopolitical brain drain to the shocking countercultural instructions in Jeremiah's letter, from the harsh reality of the 70-year timeline to the world-changing choices of Basil the Great, all the way to the emotional processing in the lyrics of a modern song, the core takeaway is profound, and it challenges everything about our modern culture of instant gratification.
The natural human instinct is to hit the pause button on your life until conditions are perfect. We tell ourselves, I will start being kind to my neighbors. I will start working hard at my job. I will start seeking spiritual depth. I will start building my community just as soon as I get out of this mess.
As soon as I get the promotion, as soon as the economy turns around, as soon as my partner changes their behavior, as soon as I move to a better city.
Exactly. We defer our lives. But the message of Jeremiah 29 is a revolutionary alternative. It says, do not waste your waiting season. Your current hardship is not a pause button on your life. It is the laboratory where your deepest character is forged.
The brutal discipline of the Babylonian exile is what finally cured the ancient Israelites of their fatal polytheism. The friction and sickness of the complicated city of Caesarea is what forced Basil to invent the hospital. The waiting is not an interruption to the work. The waiting is the work.
Whether you are currently stuck in a job that feels like a dead end, whether you are navigating a difficult, entrenched family dynamic that you cannot simply walk away from, or whether you are just enduring a long, painful season of life that looks absolutely nothing like the blueprint you drew up for yourself 10 years ago, you have a choice.
You can listen to the false prophets of escapism. You can hold your breath, sit on your packed suitcase, rot in the waiting room of history, and let bitterness consume you while you resent everyone around you. Or you can take a deep, grounding breath, walk outside, and start planting a garden right where you stand. You can choose to do excellent work for a boss you don't like. You can choose to be a blessing to the neighbors who irritate you the most. You can seek the peace of your own personal Babylon.
Because as the ancient text promised, in the peace of the city, you will ultimately find your own peace.
Before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to hand it over to you for one final thought. We've unpacked the history, we've looked at the application, but what is a final provocative idea our listeners can take away and mull over as they go about their week?
Let's connect this ancient concept to the most ubiquitous reality of our modern lives. Throughout this episode, we have been talking about Babylon as a physical place, an ancient walled city or a modern hostile office building or a literal bad geographical situation. But in our hyper-connected modern era, our Babylon isn't always physical. I would argue that for millions of us, our primary residence, the place where we spend the vast majority of our waking hours and emotional energy, is the digital world. It's social media, it's the comment sections, it's the infinite scroll of the internet.
Oh, that is a staggering connection. The digital space as our exile.
Think about the nature of the digital world. It is frequently hostile. It is deeply toxic. It is driven by opaque algorithms that intentionally reward outrage, tribalism, and division. It is, in many ways, completely foreign and hostile to our true core human values of empathy, nuance, and connection. In a very real sense, we are all living as digital exiles in a foreign empire. And what is our instinct when we log on? We revert to fight or flight. We want to argue and burn it down, throwing digital bombs over the wall to people we disagree with. Or we just want to escape it entirely, the digital equivalent of fleeing to Basil's cave, deleting all our apps in a fit of righteous exhaustion.
The urge to just opt out of the madness.
Exactly. But if we apply the radical framework of Jeremiah 29 to the internet, What does it actually look like to seek the peace of your digital Babylon? Are you constantly trying to escape, or are you actively figuring out how to plant gardens in the comment sections? Are you building genuine supportive communities in hostile spaces? Are you deliberately injecting peace, intellectual nuance, and radical friendship into platforms that are literally coded to make you hate your neighbor? It is a massive, incredibly difficult challenge. But maybe, just maybe, that is the exact modern exile we have been called to navigate today.
Are you planting gardens in the comments section? That is a brilliant, convicting question to leave lingering. It reframes our entire online existence. And don't rush away when this deep dive ends. Coming up next is Hope in Babylon by the Worship Collective. The Worship Collective creates biblically focused teaching through song to inspire Bible study and help the Word of God settle into your spirit. This song connects beautifully with Jeremiah 29 because it reminds us you can be in a hard place and still have hope.
It's an incredible song, really captures the whole message.
If this song blesses you, let us know in the comments. Tell us whether you like having these songs attached to the Sunday school lesson so we know whether to keep including them.
Yes, please let us know.
And as we close, let's just go to the Lord in prayer. Lord, give us the strength to seek the peace of the city. Give us the courage to plant gardens when we're weeping, and the faith to trust you in the waiting room of our lives. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Didn't choose this road I'm walking. I didn't plan this place of pain. But even here your voice is calling, and hope is rising once again. You told me build while I am waiting. You told me plant through all my tears. You said pray for the place I'm living, and trust that you are still right here. Your timing is holy, your promise is true. Even in Babylon, I still belong to you. I've got hope in Babylon, faith when the night is long. I will seek you with my whole heart and find you where I am. You have plans to bring me peace, grace that will not let me leave. Jesus, you are holding on. I've got hope in Babylon. False voices say it will be easy, but you call me to trust